Happy solstice season, everyone. Happy Yule, Merry Christmas, whatever it is that you are celebrating. I just hope that you are finding this to be a season of rejoicing and also rest and integration. We're coming out of the darkest period of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, and it is this time of the return of the light. But I know also in modern culture, at least for me, and I celebrate Christmas, it's a time of a lot of busyness. It's a kind of an expensive time. There can be a lot of sort of frenetic energy. And during that time, I really try to make space to read, which is my, thing I love the most potentially, but specifically to read things that are grounding and contemplative. So in this sort of Christmas season, I started reading the Gnostic Gospel of Mary. And if you're not familiar with the Gospels or really any of this kind of stuff, don't worry. There's no requirement to be into it. There's no requirement of sort of religious or even historical belief. But rather, I just like presenting these texts, or just the suggestion of even studying these texts in context of who we are as women in our feminist history. I think it's remarkable to consider the ancient texts written by women, and there aren't that many of them. I mean, there are, but comparatively to the ones that are written by men, we have a relative few. And I think any woman throughout history who has walked her walk or walked through her life with dedication to her spiritual path, and also the discipline and commitment to write down what it is that she thought needed to be passed on, and then to have that be kept and celebrated and brought forward in the case of this gospel over 2,000 years later, like that is an amazing feat. And I think we really owe it to ourselves and absolutely to the women of history to spend time with their texts and really think about what they were trying to communicate to us. And I know when I do that, and when I spend time in feminist history and spend time with contemplative works, I feel more grounded in my current approach to living as a woman in this world. I also feel really supported by the women who have come before me tens of, dozens of years, or, in this case, about 2,000 years for the Gospel of Mary. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about that because this is what I'm contemplating currently. So if you aren't familiar, the Gospel of Mary was discovered relatively recently compared to the other Gospels, so towards the end of the 18th century, and then there have been multiple translations that are done, and I picked a translation here, and I'm going to quote from it in a minute that I really liked, but I read a few. And the Mary in question is generally considered to be Mary Magdalene, who is known to be a follower of Jesus, but potentially also his lover or his life partner, which I think is a beautiful thing to just be considering. There's another thought or another faction of scholarship that believes the Mary is actually the Mother Mary, so Jesus's mother. And I think that is an incredible sort of question to hold as well. Just the idea that there was this incredible sort of spiritual thought that was coming through in a lineage that in some ways predates Jesus. So that's sort of a cool concept as well. But regardless, the exact identity of this woman is not, clearly known to history, but I think her writing still can fuel us, and there's still things that we can take from it at this time. So I'm going to read a quote that I really love from the Gospel of Mary, and then talk about it in context, and then hopefully it will feel as supportive to you as it did to me. So the quote is, "Why do you judge me when I have made no judgment? I have been dominated, but I myself have not dominated. I have not been recognized, but I myself have recognized that all things which are composed shall be decomposed, on earth and in heaven, as above, so below." So that's just a beautiful quote. And the context of this is in the Gospel of Mary, there is a spiritual seeker who is sort of working through barriers to spiritual growth. And in this particular context, there was a barrier that is personified in the gospel, in the writing, that is coming up against our seeker and proclaiming that they are bad or that they are wicked or that they've done wrong and that they're essentially a bad person. And the response of the seeker is no, I just refute that. And I have seen horrible things, but I haven't myself done them, right? They have been in my life, but I have not been a perpetrator. I have been on the receiving end of dominance and judgment and lack of recognition, but I haven't actually then turned those things onto, my fellow beings in the world. And with this assertion, this just rejection of our own sort of badness or, wickedness, the barrier to spiritual growth that's in the gospel just disappears. They just are like, oh, and then they just go on their way. And then the barrier is lifted, and the spiritual seeker can move on without that hindrance. I love this message, and I love it. And specifically in terms of women, and thinking that this is a woman writing the gospel. And if we just think about feminist history, women have been judged, women have been dominated, women have not been recognized, and that's being stated. And the response is, but that's not what I do in return. And as I just actually share goodness back into the world, spiritual barriers and really, community barriers and ascension barriers are diminished as I move forward in my growth. I think this is particularly relevant to the discussion of matriarchy versus patriarchy. I often, maybe there's this sentiment that goes around that matriarchy is just the replacing of patriarchy with women in power. And I think that is such a misunderstanding, but instead of sort of replacing this top-down domination culture that we associate with patriarchal structures, but instead with equanimity that can be found in matriarchal structures. That's what feels as though is being asserted to me in this particular quote from this particular female writer of this particular gospel, is this sentiment of just like, no, there have been horrible things, and that's not what I do. And don't put that on me. That's not how I move through the world. I'm not wicked. That's not for me. I don't have anything to do with that. And the more I reject that, the more I can just move forward on my path to spiritual growth, which that's a cool sentiment. And there's nothing that hits quite like this for me in any of the other gospels. I think this quote to me feels specifically female, which is why I chose it and why I wanted to share it all with you. A few other sort of notes about just sort of this moment or this context. My hope is that you can take this sentiment and just be incorporating it into your season. I think we're in a moment in the world where maybe a lot of us feel like we're on the receiving end of judgment, or there's a lot of choices, or I don't know about any of you, but I have personally been told a lot in the last few years that I am doing it wrong, that I'm harming people, that I am not community oriented, or whatever within the context of our contemporary global moment. And I just reject that wholeheartedly. I just, stay grounded and clear in my assertion that I am walking my walk, and that as I reject what's coming at me, which feels sort of untrue or wicked, that I can actually just move forward and that those things can dissipate from my path. So I hope you just enjoyed this little foray into this incredible piece of historical feminist writing. And if you're interested in this topic, please let me know. This is just one piece of writing that happens to be of religious context, but I read a lot of primary source writing of women and feminists throughout history, really starting with this gospel, Mary Magdalene, but then also moving forward to so many other incredible women throughout history that have really created sort of the basis of what I would consider to be feminist thought, or what we really think about in terms of matriarchal structures, or really replacing structures of power with structures of equanimity and balance. There are so many women out there that have written and given us gifts throughout human history. And when I study them, I feel more grounded, I feel happier, and I feel more present in the woman that I am today. So if you like this stuff, you can shoot me an email or drop a note in the comment. And happy solstice season, everyone. Happy Yule, happy return of the light, and Merry Christmas.